Hello and welcome to another episode of our series on India's wars since our independence. We've earlier done a 4-part account of the 1947-48 Jammu and Kashmir operations, the 1962 Sino-Indian conflict, and this episode is the first of the 2 parts on the 1965 Indo-Pak War. It is important to understand that Pakistan's agenda for the 1965 conflict was inspired by events of 1947-48 in particular, and to a lesser extent, the Chinese operations against India in 1962. Why? The reasons are as follows. There was a war game in the US, and as we know, Pakistan historically, since its creation, has on and off been in the American camp. In fact, Pakistan's military by the 1960s had started engaging extensively with the Americans, with Pakistan having become part of the SEATO and the CENTO alliances that Washington had created for a chain block of countries to surround the Soviet bloc and the China-led communist regimes. So therefore, Pakistan was not only receiving top-of-the-line American military equipment, 2 of them that came very handy to Pakistan in 1965 were the Sabre jets and the Patton tanks. But before we come to that, there was a war game, which is what militaries normally engage in to try and examine the possibilities of a military operation, of how it will unfold. So this war game in Washington gave the Pakistani military commanders encouragement to consider attacking India and win the Kashmir Valley over with certain military operations which would be carried out by Pakistan to make sure they did not do a repeat of the 1947-48 invasion of Kashmir, where they came so close to taking over the Kashmir Valley and Srinagar in particular. But then when the Indian Army was pulled up by the government to go and fight the Pakistanis, because the Kashmiris were holding out for what they were worth, and India was not engaging Pakistan in military operations till Kashmir acceded to the Union of India. So when Kashmir acceded, when the Maharaja in a hopelessness said, "I have lost Kashmir," and then the Defense Committee of the Cabinet of Pandit Nehru decided to throw the Indian Army into the valley, and in those operations the Indian Army evicted whatever Pakistanis they could from the valley and even from areas beyond the Pir Panjal, such as Poonch and Naushera and right up to Zojila. But more specifically to 1964-65, where a war game gave Pakistan the impression that if they did not make the mistake of what they did in 47-48 by pushing in irregulars, ill-led but disorganized into the valley, this time they were to lead irregular looking forces, which are not necessarily irregular forces, but they were military officers and military men dressed in shalwar kurta, trying to look like mujahideen and guerrillas, to go into the valley and create mayhem there, and then Pakistan would launch a military operation to cut off Kashmir from India. So these were the 2-part operations that Pakistan, and Ayub Khan in particular, who was encouraged by his think tanks in Pakistan, that the use of irregular forces and guerrilla forces or such like forces by Pakistan would give Pakistan an advantage over Indian troops in operations, because on a regular basis, Indian Army was still relatively bigger than the Pakistan Army. then Pakistan would be able to claim an independence for Kashmir and therefore claim the territory to get it to join the Union of Pakistan. But two events happened before that. One was the sudden disappearance of the symbol of Islam from the valley. That was the Moe Muqaddas in what is the Hazrat Bal Mosque now. It suddenly disappeared. This caused massive uproar in Kashmir and a huge amount of rioting and anger. Pakistan's leaders, Ayub Khan in particular, were given to understand by the intelligence agencies that this uprising in Kashmir was against Delhi's rule. The truth was far from that. Soon, the Moe Muqaddas suddenly reappeared back in its place in the Hazrat Bal Mosque and tempers cooled down. But Ayub and his planners began to plan on capitalizing on that situation. The other was Pakistan made some military intrusions in the Run of Kutch area, which is near Gujarat. And in the Run of Kutch area, the boundary is not very clearly marked. There are lots of sand dunes and a lot of salty wasteland where Pakistani troops made incursions. And the Indian troops did not want to inflame the situation, so responded with measured defense. Pakistan interpreted this act as an act of weakness of an Indian army, which had in their mind, as Ayub was told by Zulfikar Bhutto, a young, ambitious foreign minister of Pakistan, that time only 33, 34 years old, that India has lost the stomach for a fight. Why? Because just 2 years before, in 1962, the Chinese had humiliated us with their invasions, as has been brought out in 2 of my earlier episodes. So Pakistan army believed, led by Bhutto and Ayub Khan, that India was not going to fight back. And therefore, they launched their 2-part operation for the liberation of Kashmir. Part 1 was going to be called Operation Gibraltar. And Operation Gibraltar would basically include 7,000 to 24,000 irregulars. The exact figure isn't known, but Gohar Ayub Khan, who was the son of General Ayub Khan and that time a captain in the army and ADC to his own father, who was president, has admitted on record that more than 5,000 Pakistan army men were used in these operations. Now, these operations included infiltration into various parts of Jammu and Kashmir to create a disruption in the communication links, break down telephone lines, blow up bridges, blow up rail connectivity up to Jammu area, but beyond wherever it existed, and basically create confusion in the state. Now, India's intelligence agencies, which don't have a very good record of alerting Delhi about the impending Pakistani agenda, did not report the matter to Delhi. But bits and pieces of this information started coming into Delhi, and the Indian Air Force Chief then, Air Chief Marshal Arjun Singh, who later became Marshal of the Air Force, took permission from the Raksha Mantri, the Defense Minister, Y.B. Chavan, to go and visit Kashmir and check out what he was getting through military sources, some of these inputs. And accompanying him was the Indian Army Chief, General Chaudhry. And between them, they went to Kashmir Valley, sussed the situation, and found matters were pretty serious. Pakistanis had begun to infiltrate in various parts of Jammu Kashmir, but interestingly, what the Kashmiri population had shown then as commitment to the Indian Union, that they were capturing these Pakistani small groups and handing them to the local police stations of J&K to imprison them and put them up for greater investigation. And once this combination of information came to Delhi and the picture became clear to the leadership in Delhi, particularly the Defense Minister, Mr. Y.B. Chavan, he did something unusual. He ordered the military to prepare for operations against Pakistan in the plains of Punjab, and he said, you get on with it and I will get the permission of the cabinet. Extremely decisive step, but he got the permission of the government of Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, and India soon put its forces together to go in for multiple pronged operations with tank columns and attacks into Punjab of Pakistan, where Pakistan had been putting together troops and forces to launch its second part of operation called Operation Grand Slam. So one of the major lessons that we learned from the 1965 operations was any adventure of Pakistan for liberating Kashmir from India would be met with an Indian response right across the Indo-Pak border as it exists today, which was then just the western border of India with Pakistan. And India's response would be severe and would not be limited to only attacking or holding back against Pakistani attacks on Indian territory. But that is the subject of our next episode.